Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and all parts of my writing are important, so put them in whatever way you want to. But first, I would like to say thank you very much for bringing this bill forward. This is a really important bill that we need to discuss because in my time here in the House of Commons, I have had the opportunity to work on a lot of work on when it comes to violence against women, domestic violence, intergenerational trauma, and to understand the impact to families. I just want to read something because according to American forensic social worker Evan Stark, who is a leading edge on this, coercive control is characterized by a pattern of negative behaviors which aim to intimidate, threaten, and humiliate a person from friends and family, taking control over aspects of everyday life such as where a person can go or who they can see, repeatedly putting a person down, making credible threats of violence or economic oppression, and entrapping them with an abusive cycle. And under Bill C-332, an act to amend the criminal code, it recognizes the dynamic between what it looks like when we're looking at intimate partner violence and how intimate partner violence is different than other forms of harassment or assault. When it comes to that trusting relationship between partners, we know it is a very different relationship when you're looking at many times a subordinate to a person who may be more in charge or any vulnerability at that. And although the criminal code does recognize sexual assaults and violence of that sort, it does not dig deep enough when it comes to what coercive control is. And I would like to talk about this bill a little bit and say to the committee, looking at these amendments that they made are very well done. I specifically looked at these amendments because when it had to get into the language regarding what coercive control was and getting into the details, we have to understand the pattern of conduct. We need to understand that it's not just a single event. Many times, police are called to a single event if it's something of a physical nature. But coercive control is something that is time and time again. And so seeing that there is a full detail in here, I would really like to thank the members of the committee who did this great work on this, because we need to make sure that when we're talking about it, if we're wanting to educate on it, if we want to ensure that the police know how to enforce it, we need to have a good understanding of it. So the committee has done a great job on that. But exactly what we have the issue here is when it comes to reporting, and that is why education has to be paramount here. One of the greatest tragedies we have here is that when abuse does happen, especially to women, they do not call. And we know that in over 90% of cases when violence against women, that the victims are not calling the police to report. And what happens is you're getting people who are not reporting, and then you're looking at who is not reporting. And in that group, you're finding more marginalized women who are becoming more vulnerable. And many of the reasons they're not reporting is because of trust. So if you have had somebody that you've reported once or twice before, because this was going on, are you going to call them back if it just continues to happen and happen and happen again? And without coercive control being in the criminal code, that is the type of things that were happening. It is so hard to prove what coercive control is. So by indicating specifically in these bills what it is, it gives a much greater depth to the courts and to the police to make sure that we are actually giving the charges that are necessary. To survivors, though, this is where, for survivors, this is a very difficult thing for them. Because survivors of coercive control are fighting between trying to protect their children, protect themselves, making sure that they don't lose their child, making sure that they're protecting their child from their perpetrator, and in many cases, we're looking at the re-victimization. We have heard time and time again of people going into the courts after accusing somebody and being re-victimized. And very much like the NDP member who had sponsored this bill talking about, we need to ensure that our courts are trauma-informed, that the people working with these people who are victims of violence and intergenerational trauma are actually trained, because these are very vulnerable people. These are people who have, it's not just about hitting them and creating bruises, but it's what they have done to the person inside and internally. So many of these victims that are coming forward are already coming ripped apart. So making sure that we can support these people is very important. I would like to read a few quotes from women's organizations, because when it comes to their support of this bill or some of their concerns, they have been very active on this. And I'd really like to thank these women's organizations that are out there working day in and day out to make sure that women, when they're looking for shelters, when they're looking for financial support, they're there. Luke's Place happens to be one of these organizations. And the legal director at Luke's Place indicated, A family law support center for abused women in Oshawa says that the majority of women who are abused do not report it to police and therefore would not benefit by this new law. That is one of the concerns that they brought forward, and that's why it's important that we have all of this information. She worries that with this law, that women who defend themselves from abusive partners might themselves be accused of coercive control. And that is why we have to talk about coercive control and parental alienation and understanding how all of these pieces form together to create a really complex issue. We also have to wonder, will the police be able to enforce this? So victims, when they're making these phone calls, it may be the first call, it may be their 11th call. We do not know. We know that it usually takes up to 11 times for a woman to make that first call after being violated. So we don't know what call that's been. But if they've lost trust in the system, there is an issue. So as we're moving forward, we need to see what is positive, what is negative. How can we control this to ensure that when victims are coming forward, that they then, in turn, don't get forced in coercive control, how the tables don't get turned on them. And we have heard so much testimony from women across Canada, whether it's in justice, whether it's in the Status of Women Committee. We have heard from women who have come forward, who have shared their stories about the tables being turned on them. When they came forward, how they were talking about not having money, being followed, being stalked, a variety of different things that could happen, name calling, all of these different abuses. And the fact at the end of the day, they did not have that support. These are the things that we need to talk about. One of the biggest things, and this is what I think this legislation does, is it provides a tool. It provides something to go back on and to lean back on. And so this will allow early intervention. People, if they're educated, they may be more aware of it. They may be more aware of what is going on in a person's life. Only 30% of people have visible injuries as a result of domestic violence, and only a certain number of people experience perhaps emotional or sexual or financial parts of this abuse. So when we know that 30% have bruises, what about these other 70%? What does that look like? And why do we need to do this? And the reason we need to do this is, and I know just moments ago, people were talking about the correlation between women and femicide, the things that are happening. Between 2011 and 2021, police reported 1,125 gender-related homicides of women and girls in Canada. Of these homicides, 2/3 were perpetrated by an intimate partner, 28% a family member, 5% a friend or acquaintance, and the remaining 1% a stranger. So we know that women are victims of, in many cases, their own partner. They're people that they trust the most in their lives. Between 2011 and 2021, all gender-related homicides of women and girls, the largest proportion died by stabbing. Now, we have to look at this. Is this a first-time incident, or what happened prior to this? And we'll find that when you're looking at this would not have been the first time at violence. It is much greater than that. And although most homicide victims are men and boys, women and girls are disproportionately killed by someone they know. And that is exactly what we need to do and talk about when we're looking at coercive control. I want to end this with one last quote. And this is the case of Daniela Mela. Mela went to the police 3 days before her death to report that her ex-boyfriend was harassing and threatening her via text. She repeatedly told police that her ex-boyfriend's behavior caused her to fear for her safety. This was 3 days before this young woman was murdered. We can do more, we can do better, and I fully support this bill. I look forward to it passing in this House today. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.